That works. The Economic Development and Small Business Subcommittee on Housing will come to order. Would the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Coleman.
Here.
Representative Diebendorf.
Here.
Stone.
Here.
Scott.
Here.
Andrews. Grant.
Here.
Cerniglu.
Here.
Caragona.
Here.
Zorn. Fink.
Here.
DeBoyer.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt minutes from the last meeting on March 16th? Rep. Stone moves to adopt the minutes. Minutes are adopted. Today we have a presentation from the Michigan Housing Michigan Coalition, and here to present our members from the coalition, Jen Richterink, I'm sorry, from the Michigan Municipal League, Dawn Crandall from Home Builders Association of Michigan, Kent Wood from Housing North, and Josh Lunger from the Grand Rapids Chamber. So thank you all for joining us today. And please come up when you're ready and proceed when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We're really excited to be here today. I, too, am still trying to figure out Jen's name after working very closely with her for 2 years, so I don't try to spell it. But we're really excited to be here. This is something that's near and dear to our hearts. The four of us represent the executive committee of Housing Michigan, and we're just a loose coalition of groups that formed 2 years ago, or 2.5 now, because we were all having conversations, whether it was regionally here at the state level in Lansing, or in different pockets across the state with other associations, other networks about the housing crisis that we're all seeing in our communities, and realize that, man, we're having a tough time getting traction. And so we wanted to get together, and so we did, and we started talking about what can we do with urgency to address the gaps that we know exist in supplying more housing that's more affordable to more Michigan families. And so we came together, and we have several dozen other associations, organizations, businesses, nonprofits, you name it, that have played a part in this coalition over the last 2 years. Namely, the items that we were successful in getting done last year were ideas that not just the four of us came up with, but ideas that stakeholders from across the state had submitted that we found had the most consensus going forward. But in short, again, we are a coalition of all these different diverse groups who are focused on increasing housing supply and affordability across the state. And then my last part before I hand it off to Jen is, obviously this is the housing subcommittee, so I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit. But why do we care about housing? And this is true for all of us, I believe, that everyone needs housing, first of all. But we know through research and personal experience that all the things that we care about, as whether it's a business group, whether it's a nonprofit representing communities across the northern part of the state, builders and municipalities, that all these things that contribute to our quality of life, health outcomes, access to jobs, employment, student success, economic growth, require stable access of housing. And so we are continuing to push with urgency. We might touch on some of the things that are coming towards you at the end of our presentation, but this is something that we've been really thankful that we've had such good support on from both the legislature and many other groups. Oh, I'm sorry, I had one more thing. So one thing that we find is there's a lot of emotion involved in housing. Obviously, it's a personal issue. There's also a lot of technical words, as well as some assumptions about what we're talking about. So to help, how we as a group have kind of been addressing what affordable, attainable, or market rate housing is we broke it down into these buckets. Maybe Mishta has a scientific terminology that is more accurate, but really what we're looking at is affordable is really almost up to 60% of the area median income, AMI. Attainable is between 60 and 120%, and then market rate is really that 120% or higher. Now that's not always a perfect definition, and that we're using that because below 30% you're eligible for public vouchers. Up to 60% you're eligible for LIHTC funded units. There are some supports from CDBG and home funds between that 60 and 80, and then 80 to 120 was something that we found really didn't have a ton of support, and it was really hard to deliver in the current market conditions. And that's where we focused a lot of our effort last year, was how do we fill this gap in the attainable housing bucket? And then obviously market rate are those that have enough income to be able to afford the market rate. And then when we talk about workforce housing, which is we kind of lump in with attainable housing, what I think is surprising to some folks is how many different job fields are households that are in these sectors. And so here's some. We went to Michigan Works and said, give us your different job fields for parts of the state and what the incomes are. And it's basically every career field you can imagine, from folks coming into the skilled trades out of high school to those with higher degrees getting into other professions. And so it impacts everyone.
So one of the things that, Josh glossed over, that is the reason a lot of us weren't getting things done is because we were actually fighting each other. Local government was fighting home builders and realtors and the chambers with preemptions. And so really the unique thing to highlight here is when our coalition came together is we really sat down and said, this is important. We all know we need to work on this. What can we agree upon and come together around? And we have had, this has been a great coalition effort. Yes, the four of us are up here, but as Josh highlighted, there is a huge amount of groups and diverse organizations that are working as part of the coalition as well. Why is local government involved in this? We are really supporting and working on opt-in, locally driven flexibility because housing needs are different depending on where you live. And so whether that's income need as well as the stock and type of housing that individuals or families are looking to live in. And so we have really been working around one of our coalition partners, the Michigan Association for Planning, zoning reform toolkit. So this toolkit is providing 15 different tools to expand housing choice and supply. So working with our members, trying to reform their zoning to help move housing projects that they need more quickly through that process. The unfortunate part is there's just not a lot of funding, and to actually go in and actually redo your antiquated zoning takes a lot. So working with MAP and their zoning reform is one tool that we've tried. And then at the League, working with the MEDC, we actually have put together a project called Pattern Book Homes for the 21st Century, where we are free sourcing blueprints for trying to increase density in neighborhoods, but really not look like you're increasing density. So you're building a home that fits into that neighborhood, but maybe it is a twoplex or a fourplex. And now you're providing options for multi-generational situations or for that homeowner to possibly have rental income. And so these are something that we've been working on to free source the blueprints, as well as, again, work with our members to streamline their zoning processes to move things through quickly.
So when we look at housing and the cost of housing and the obstacles, right now for Michigan household priced out of the market by an increase in interest rates for 2022, the new median new house price in Michigan at a mortgage rate of 7.25%, the new house price median is $350,000 for a new build in the state of Michigan. That means your monthly mortgage payment at the 7.25% is $2,307. You've got taxes and insurance at $528. Your minimum income needed in this state would be $121,000 to afford a new market home. And so when you look at that, a lot goes into that cost, and it's, the building materials cost. We saw in COVID, lumber went through the roof, and we were looking at exact same plans in Kalamazoo where the lumber package literally doubled the next year because prices went so high, even though the footprint and the plan of that home did not change at all. You look at regulatory obstacles, our national says about 40% of the cost of a home is regulatory and land. and labor. And so you look at some of those regulatory costs, which is Jen talks about, local municipalities being able to streamline the regulatory process. That's only going to help bring the costs down somewhat. You look at workforce needs, we have a huge labor shortage in this state, and we've actually expanded that definition. We used to talk about the skilled trades. We've now, as Jen and I start talking, we're also talking about municipal labor as well. The people who do the permitting and the inspections, they're starting to, in my nicest phrase, like our builders, age out and get ready to retire. And we need those individuals in the workforce as well to help the process move along. I mentioned interest rates, mortgage rates, inflation, land costs. A lot of our members are now saying they're just even having a difficult time finding land. And so when we look at some of the legislation that was passed last year, Senator Moss had the expansion of the neighborhood enterprise zones, which as long as there's infrastructure already existing, that tool can be used. And so we're looking at that as being a community infill projects in that use. So when we look at the opportunities, there are incentives, the 4 bills that were signed into law on December 13th of last year. I know Josh is going to mention a couple things that will be coming your way after spring break. As we look at zoning and land use opportunities and having, the ability to have municipalities rework their master plans to become housing-ready communities. Workforce development, we have a nonprofit called Skill to Build Michigan Foundation, and this week, 570,000 students in grades 8, 9, 10, 11th, and 12 will be receiving a book called Build Your Future, a complete guide to skilled trades. They started shipping Monday. And then as we look at the permitting process, is there an easier way to make that happen across the state? So if you look at single-family permit history, and I'm not going to read you all these numbers, but it really does show why we are in a housing crisis. So if you look at 2005, there were 40,000. I always come up with a number a little bit higher, but we'll go with this one, 40,392, and then you drop to 07, that number drops to 15,000. You drop to 09, it drops to 6,300, and then we've slowly been on the I think I can train. Historically, we should be building anywhere between 25 and 30,000 homes a year just to kind of keep up with our need and our demand. Our prediction this year for Michigan is about 15,523 single-family permits. So these are all just single-family, they're not multifamily. But you can see that we really have not been developing to the level that we should be. We had a meeting with MISHDA 2 days ago. Their number for need today, not 5 years down the road, was 190,000 units today at the cost of $54 billion. So we are underdeveloped. And then this just shows who can afford homes at what price point. So when we talk about attainable, we talk about attainable at all levels, from the entry level to, the 1.5 million and above cost of homes. And so if you're looking at that 350,000 number, there's a whole lot of people who cannot afford even a new home at the median price. Josh, what was the number?
80% of Michigan households can't afford a home at the new median price. So I've got a few more in-depth statistics, and again, I won't read everything, but we want to show that this is something that is backed up by a lot of research. So through our partner in West Michigan, which is Housing Next, which is similar to the group that Kent represents, Housing North, we've done some research over the last several years with a bunch of other partners. We just updated the Kent County housing needs assessment, and what you can see is Kent County itself by 2027, factoring in all the currently planned and permitted projects, we're expecting that we'll fall 35,000 units short by 2027. And you can see there's demand across all price points. And so we're really, as a coalition, we're focused on, yes for housing, right? People ask, what do you need? Yes, we need housing. And it's important that we seek to address all these price points. When you look at Kent and Ottawa combined, because Ottawa County updated their numbers last year, the number's about 50,000 units. And so when we spread that out into affordable, attainable, and market rate, you can see why a lot of our focus has been in that peak area, because we don't have a lot of tools until last year, which we're still out educating both communities and foreign nonprofit developers and builders about there wasn't a lot we could do to address the supply needs in that attainable mix, whereas most of our households fall. And so this is concerning. We were talking yesterday with some of our financial institutions in West Michigan, trying to predict the future, which is always hard, especially with uncertain market conditions, about how will things change going forward. We're bullish. West Michigan is continuing to grow. We've gotten questions as a coalition about, the state's not growing, why are we having so many issues? Well, like Dawn said, we've failed to keep up. We've underproduced for decades, potentially. And we're also seeing, we might not see population growth, we are seeing household growth. And so we're seeing a lot of, and I didn't put all the data in here, but I can get it if there's people that want to get really nerdy about some of this stuff. We're seeing households that may have been a child living with a parent, or maybe longer than they intended to, now having income growth because there's been a lot of wage growth in West Michigan recently, and they want to branch out and they want to start a family, or they want to move in with somebody else. And so despite even a lower prediction for population growth, there's still going to be that added need of household growth. And I'm sure, again, I have really good data for West Michigan, but Kent will mention some items from Northern Michigan, and it's replicated across the state. But here's a couple quick hits that I thought were interesting from our recent update. We are seeing a lot of growth in rental gaps, a lot of growth at the higher ends of the market, but also in that middle continues to be the hardest part. Rapid growth for needs for sale homes, so a lot of single family, or single family can look a little bit different. It doesn't need to be just that classic unit, but it's people that want to purchase their own home for households earning more than $100,000. But we are seeing rents have escalated rapidly, particularly along market rate rentals, because despite a very concerted effort to build more and a lot of interest, it's hard to catch up with the demand that we've failed to meet for a long time. And then something that I think every one of you have probably heard in your own communities, that housing stock below 200,000 has diminished drastically. In some communities, it's basically non-existent. In 2013, I bought my first home for $65,000 in Grand Rapids. A few years later, I bought my next one for $130,000. And there is no way, you look at, I could sell my home and make all this money. There's no way I could find a home at that price point and anywhere in West Michigan right now. You basically have to have a full-time job to look for it. And last thing I want to highlight is the step-down effect. Now, we actually have data on this. It's not just theoretical. I just didn't put it in here. So if the four of us are all competing for that $250,000 home, and that's our sweet spot, we're going to drive up the price. Three of us are not going to get that home. We're then going to compete for a home that we have to go down. We're then going to compete for a home that's probably priced at about $230,000. We're going to drive that up, two of us, and it goes down and down. And who pays the price when we have this much of a housing shortage and supply-demand issue are the individuals with the least amount of resources. And so the worse we do as a state, as communities, as regions in addressing our supply needs at all price points, the more that those with the least amount of income and the least or the most at risk are going to be the ones that suffer. And then Kent will maybe talk a little bit about what's coming next and some of the things we're seeing in Northern Michigan.
Sure. Thank you, Dawn.
You're welcome, Kent.
Great, thanks, Josh, and good morning, everybody. So Kent Wood, I represent Housing North, which is a nonprofit based in Traverse City, but it actually covers the 10-county region in northwest Lower Michigan. So basically from Manistee County up the coast to Emmett County, where Petoskey is. And just as you can see from this chart here, even in northwest Lower Michigan, which is, by and large, a lot of smaller counties, smaller communities, villages and towns, by and large, very rural. Even that area of the state is about 15,000 units short. If you recall Dawn's numbers from permits that we can expect for this year, that's about how many permits that the state is going to put out this year for single-family homes. It's a little over 15,000. And that's from little old northwest Lower Michigan. So, I know no one on the committee here serves that region. You all come from different areas. Many of you come from districts that are much larger areas of the state. So if you can imagine kind of the numbers that we have up in northwest Lower Michigan, if we're competing for those those building permits, you've most likely got way more than 15,000 that you need for your regions as well. We tend to find that a number of the counties also have some of the highest average home prices in the state. So as, Josh mentioned, and Dawn, we're at about $350,000 right now as our median home. A number of our counties are above that, and in some cases, with Grand Traverse County and Leelanau County, well above that, into the 400 and 450,000 type of range. So, prices matter. Costs matter. It is not only in our region, but around the state, it is a battle to get that cost per square foot down as low as you can, assuming that you are trying to, build some of those attainable homes in that 60 to 120% AMI range. You really have to fight at all levels to try to get that cost per square foot down. So what Housing North does is really, in a nutshell, works with communities and developers to really try to bring them and some of the different stakeholders together to put the different puzzle pieces together to build housing really at all levels in our region. They work with communities on a lot of awareness as well, awareness around zonings, different incentives or programs that are out there, what kind of properties that they might have in their communities that would make sense, and then the development process overall. We still have, I would say, a large knowledge gap in communities and with elected officials and administrators even, and even those that are very pro-housing, and just in understanding what it takes to put some of these developments, large and small, together, what the capital structure looks like, and what some of the different challenges are to developers to build housing units, especially in that 60 to 120% of the AMI range. So as looking forward as a coalition, as Josh mentioned briefly, we want to continue to kind of push forward and push the envelope on new and creative ways that we can beat back those costs that are associated with workforce and attainable housing. Dawn had that list up there. It's everything from taxes to labor to material costs to property costs. Just the amount of money sometimes to purchase a property can be very challenging. And so, we're very supportive, and we are strongly pushing an all-in approach. All kinds of housings, whether it's single-family homes, duplexes, up to your larger for-rent residential units, and all sorts of ways of getting there. Everything from new types of incentives, regulatory, helping with the labor shortage issues, and taxes that exist in communities as well. To do that, we're going to look at, we'd like to really continue to look at, and, with you as this committee as well, ways that we can get different stakeholders involved. We did a lot of work over the last 2 years on finding new ways for especially local units of government to have more tools in that 60 to 120% AMI range. We want to continue that, but also to bring in employers, different kinds of philanthropic organizations, incentivize them to get into the housing game more. Also, looking at incentivizing zoning changes in different communities. We think one of the big things holding communities back to some of this development is just quite simply what they allow there and what they don't allow there. And so opportunities to not only make communities aware of that, but help them with some of the costs to make those changes, because it is time consuming. It costs. If you've got the staff to do it, that's great, but it still costs them time and resources to do it. If you're a smaller community and you don't have the staff, then typically you will have to source that out to a third party to help you with that. So looking at potentially helping incentivize some of those zoning changes across the state, we think will have a big impact not just in the near term, but over time too, as the years pile on top of each other. We also know that there's a package of bills allowing for housing to be used in tax increment financing projects in plans. That's making its way through the Senate right now. And we're hoping by sometime shortly after spring break, we'll be over here in the House, potentially maybe in front of the subcommittee as well. And so we won't dive into detail on that today, but just a heads up, we are excited about that, and that's kind of one of the first major housing packages that's moving forward at this term. So with that, I want to thank you all again. I'm going to turn it over to Josh, but would be remiss if I didn't say that all of us up here are looking forward to working with you, but also happy to be resources for you, either as a committee or for your individual districts as well, if you do have different housing questions. We've also got a great bunch of other coalition members behind us. I know Jessica Ackmoody is here with CEDM today. Brad Ward with the Michigan Association of Realtors, and many, many others too that have come together to form this this great coalition that we're really proud to be a part of.
So I'll just close by saying, you'll notice that we didn't say this is how you solve housing. And we don't expect that any work done in front of this committee will necessarily solve housing. But what we are excited about is that there is a much greater sense of urgency around the state and Lansing and our communities than there has been previously. It's really about how can we lean in and accelerate the work that needs to be done. The hard part about housing is we can do a lot of great things, like those new incentives that we talked about last year. It's a slow build to see the impact. You might see a project here, a project there. It's really about how can we every year over year start hitting better metrics in terms of what we're producing, how much we're producing, how affordable it is, and that's statewide in every community. Every community has a role to play. There's a lot of organizations like Housing North or Housing Next in West Michigan that are leading the charge at the regional level. Our goal is then how do we give them more assets or tools to go and lead the change, because each community is going to have to play a key role in it. We can't necessarily dictate everything, but we can help drive the understanding and the need. So with that, we'll take any questions. Happy to dive deeper into data points or some of the obstacles that we see from different directions, and then, again, obviously the opportunities out there.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you all being here and your presentation, and I'm glad that you're working together as a coalition, and I think this committee shares a lot of the concerns that you have as well. I know that some of the topics you discussed are relevant to our districts individually, but our state as a whole. So I do appreciate your presentation today. And I'll say that, the slide that probably made the biggest impression on me was the one that showed the drop-off in new builds, new permits. And I'm curious, I had a couple questions. Have you looked at population trend estimates to see if that might converge, where if we can get more permitting and more builds, what's Michigan's outlook as far as people coming into the state or leaving the state and population trend? Have you looked at that? And then my other question was, how do we rank as a state in new builds compared to other Midwest states of the same size? Have you looked at that too?
I took it out of here. A group called Up for Growth did a national study about underproduction. Their whole point is it's a supply-demand issue, and again, it's at all price points, but historically across the United States, we are underproducing. Michigan, their estimate was Michigan is underproduced about 87,000 units. And when you compare that, I'm going off some memory here a little bit, we were amongst, for our size, number of population of the state and the most underproduced, we were amongst some of the worst. I'd say we're probably in the top 25% or worst 25% based on that. I can find that information and share it. As far as population estimates go, the group that did the West Michigan research that is now, I think, doing something up in Northwest Michigan that we've used, they estimate that our region will continue to grow by about 1.5% over the next 5 years.
I'm sorry?
our West Michigan will continue to grow by about 1.5% in the next 5 years. The rest of the state, they're predicting a very small decrease in population. But when you look at, the historical underproduction of housing as well as the household growth, which will probably, again, continue to happen as folks maybe, the trend in Michigan and across the state is that households are getting smaller. So you need more households for the same amount of people, regardless of population growth. Population growth obviously adds to that. But as to is there a way where we can connect the need just in what we're looking at for our data, we're so far behind that in the next 5 years, we're not going to hit it, right? We're going to probably continue. We're trying to reduce how far we are falling behind. And even with some of the really good work that's gone on, where we've seen significant increases in production of certain housing types, because of the continued growth of households and population in West Michigan, the number has jumped up significantly. In Kent County, it was more than 50% increase in the number of units from our 2020 study to our 2022 study.
Well, and I think also as we look at, Michigan becoming that economic destination, in terms of SOAR funding and job creations coming to the state. We look at Marshall, 2,500 jobs. Marshall doesn't have 2,500 homes. So, that really needs to be part of the conversation as we're looking at economic development in the state, because it'll take 2 years for development from beginning to shovel in the ground to be completed, and if you're bringing in that kind of jobs into a community that may not have those homes available, that's only going to make the problem grow so we've got to keep going and building on what we've already lost, and housing needs to be a conversation on the front end of those economic development conversations, and not, I hate to say an afterthought, but it can't be until the ink is dried that we go, oh crap, we need 2,500 homes in Marshall, because they're not going to go, you're just not going to pop them up overnight.
And even if you could, we're having supply chain and labor issues, but I think one thing to drive home is, MSHDA's new data that we're already 190,000 units short for just where we are today is huge, because if we don't grow population in our state, we're not going to see economic prosperity. So we have to grow population to continue that upward trend, and we're already very far behind on the housing, and so that's why we need to move these things along. And it's not just new builds. Yes, new builds, but we are also focused on what we can do to help maintain and rehabilitate our existing housing stock.
And I'm sure that it's obvious to say that the further behind we fall, that just creates more of an affordability problem and exacerbates what we're already dealing with. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
One of the benefits to that point, Mr. Chair, that we've seen from the increase in supply that we've been pushing in Kent County is the number of cost overburden households actually shrank, which we thought was a great success. Some of that's wage growth, but we also had significant price growth in both rental and for sale. So that means that there was a positive benefit to all the effort. We just haven't caught up enough because of the demand.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to questions from some of the members. We'll start with Representative Fink.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much to all of you for being here. It's nice to see you. I've got a series of questions. I'll just do one at a time, and if you get back to me, that's great. If not, I've already had conversations with some of this crew, and I know those will continue. I think the first one I want to ask is to kind of pass along a question that I've gotten within my, from people in my district, and I have an answer, but I wonder what you would say. And so the population of the state has been stagnant. I heard you speaking about the difference between population growth and number of households. That's interesting. I wonder if you think that's a factor here, but how would you answer the question, why is it a problem that we don't have sufficient, we don't have much new housing when we don't actually have more people? How do you answer that question?
You want?
No.
Well, I think it does have to do with if we're already at a negative with supply, that as we are seeing great job opportunities here in our state, but we're all hearing from our members about stories of someone accepts a job position, then they're unable to find housing, whether that's in the income level or just the type of housing they're looking for, and they're rescinding their acceptance of that job.
Meaning that the you know, the flow of people and housing is not just, you have people and so you need housing, but if you don't have the housing, then you might not get the people. That's
Correct.
part of the story of our stagnant
Yes,
population. Yeah, thank you.
Definitely.
And I would also say, you know, as we look at, you know, Michigan is an aging population state, and I'm going through it with my parents right now, right? So in this area, there are not a lot of homes for aging in place. So my parents have a 4-bedroom, 2-story home in Okemos that they don't need to live in anymore, right? My mom is on a walker, bless her heart. I don't know how she goes up and down stairs. I don't want to watch because she keeps one at the top, one at the bottom. But there's no place for them to go unless they go to independent living, which is actually where they are now. But if people are staying in their homes longer because there aren't those step-down homes for seniors, that also doesn't free up homes for people to step up.
Did you want to, you can do a couple more. Yep, go ahead.
All right, well, I've already had hours-long meetings with some of these folks, so I hope you guys are along for the ride. So I have a question about the new construction, like, what did you say? Like, you basically can't build a house that a person wants to buy for less than $350,000 right now.
The average means, correct.
All right, so that's the average one. All right, so then maybe there's a possibility that somebody could build a
Some it's lower, some
$275,000.
it's
Yeah.
higher, depending on where you are. in
But it's
the state.
difficult, I mean, so we have these numbers from some National Home Builders Group that says there's like $93,000 in regulatory expenses before you get into just the strict cost of construction or of the land, and that number's 2 years old, and inflation is insane, and it's worse for housing, so it's probably over 100,000, so it's very expensive. How does that compare with, you know, a roughly equivalent home? So that house that costs you, that you can't make money selling this house unless it's at $350,000. What is a person getting for that in comparison with what is existing stock? A house that was built 10 years ago. Do you understand my question?
Yeah,
Because what I think is happening is that house is actually still less of a house than they would be able to get for the same amount of money if it weren't new.
If you could find that house on the market to move into. I mean, part of the problem is because we're not building new, people are staying in their homes because they can't afford to build new, so they're either remodeling, like we saw the remodeling side of our industry is doing very well. You know, in COVID, people were, you know, staying home, so they were redoing their basements, or they were remodeling their bathrooms, or, you know, they were turning a 3rd bedroom into a home office because now a lot of people are still continuing to work from home, right? And so you're seeing kind of that non-movement into a new home because it's not there, which then also then doesn't open up. And depending on the house, if it hasn't been updated, you know, people now are really looking for that home that they can walk in, buy, and not really touch. So when I was looking for my home, if there was a home that had a ton of wallpaper on it, I didn't want it. So people are looking for what they can buy, what they can move into, and not have to do a lot of work with. And so those homes are also far and fewer in between on the market for people to move within the system.
Can I add, and maybe it's not directly to your point, so you can tell me I'm off course. So that 350,000, as we're working in the region, we get really excited when we start seeing innovative actions by developers to say, all right, let's get creative, let's try to do something for 250. Because that is something that if they can build it, it's gone like that. And the problem is, and we go back to, I can probably talk about zoning and land use all day. The problem is it's pretty much illegal and almost impossible to overcome the obstacles to build something that's more affordable by its design in a vast majority of our state.
So that isn't maybe responsive to my last question, but it was exactly my next question.
Okay.
So, and I think I can pronounce Jen's last name. It's Rigterink. Obviously, like, this is a place where I don't know if there's tension within your coalition, and if you guys want to speak to that or whatever, but, you know, I was going to ask Dawn, and so now you're speaking to it. Is one of the issues that you confront here, you think, that zoning codes that were primarily developed mid-century assume, for instance, that 2 stories are better than 1, that a home of 1,300 square feet is worse than a home of 1,600 square feet. I mean, that a garage that is 2 cars is better than a garage that has 1 car. When in fact, in a given person's life, you know, if you're 40 and single, you have no kids, you don't need 1,200 square feet, you're happy with 8, but you can't build a house. So do you want to say anything else about that? kind of problem. And
You go
Jen, I
ahead.
want to
Yeah.
be, I understand there are pressures in both directions here, so.
No, but I think that's why you see this focused effort from the league and working with the Michigan Association of Planning, as well as the MEDC on these zoning reforms, specifically around housing, is, to get our folks to be able to walk through their process. But the challenge runs into usually is the capacity at the local level. They have to hire this out for a third party, and then the cost that comes along with that third-party consulting and actually updating those codes and those ordinances to streamline the process. So 100%, I mean, that's where this, right where this came from. So we have the zoning reform out there, and now we're working with our members to, if this fits into your infill, we have free sourced these blueprints. You need to update your zoning to allow these site plans to go through as a by right for the quickest approval and least amount of time, if this is something, you want in your community. Now, what we do have as an issue, and we are working with our members, we don't have a solution, is what do you do when you are sitting in a room as an elected official and it fills up with people that don't want something there just because it's going to be changed? Even though there's a lot of support, the loudest people in the room are saying no. And that is an issue we are wholeheartedly searching for solutions on to help our elected officials to be able to make that choice, when they're faced with an approval of somebody thinks it's going to increase traffic, but there's no traffic study to back that up, that there's going to increase traffic, things like that. So.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to Vice Chair Devendorf.
Am I allowed 5 questions as well? I appreciate the conversation, and I even more appreciate the coalition. I think that's fantastic, and it's so necessary. I do have a million questions, but I'm not going to ask them all, so I am requesting that we all meet as soon as possible to talk about all of this housing stuff, since several of us are digging pretty deep into addressing the housing crisis. I am wondering what your top recommendations are for a couple of things. One, recommendations for the development meeting the need for affordable housing within our communities, and attainable housing within our communities without perpetuating racial and economic segregation. In looking at it through that lens, also, how can we make rental housing more affordable for communities that are facing rising costs due to the newer development of comparable housing? Because we want our communities to be able to stay in our communities. And so I would love to hear your top recommendations for those things. And before you answer, I also noted that it was mentioned that the remodeling industry is doing really well. I see that coming from several folks, but I also would love to know if data reflects whether the remodeling industry is only doing well above a certain income bracket, and if that inability to remodel and update your home is adding to the aging housing stock, especially considering we have seniors staying in their homes longer and not necessarily being able to afford or do the work themselves. So wherever you want to tackle those things.
So I'll start with the upgrading. We're also engaged with a group looking at weatherization of homes. Excuse me. And they're having the same issue we have. So, Community Action Networks has weatherization money from DOE to go in and update and weatherize homes because that adds to your cost, right? Like if your home isn't well insulated or you have a leaky roof, your energy costs are going to go up. Their issue is the same as ours, is that they can't find the skilled labor to do that work either. And so at some point, they're going to have to send their DOE funds back if they can't complete and hit their targets by June of this year. So those are, when you're looking at price points, for those issues where the funding is paid for because it's a weatherization program, to your point, yes, those homes aren't being upgraded to the extent they should be because there is also the lack of skilled workforce. We're trying to partner with them to find ways that, maybe some of our members who are getting ready to get out of the industry would maybe go take on some weatherization programs or some lead abatement programs because they're having the same issue in their department as well. I can check on the price points to see where the remodeling is taking point. I don't know that data off the top of my head. Refresh me on your other question.
Related to aging housing stock?
Yeah,
I'm
so,
wondering if there are our aging populations and that would be left with the choice to either stay in their homes, especially long, or shift immediately into a care facility, is adding to our not updating our aging housing stock.
well, and it also, if it's not updated, we look at it and say, if they're staying in their home longer, it also doesn't allow that home to open up, where maybe somebody does want to come in and make it kind of their own vision of what they want, so they're going to rehab it. But there are, if you're looking at seniors that are on a fixed income, I mean, it's not cheap to remodel a kitchen or, or turn maybe a room on the first floor, if you can no longer go up and down your stairs, into a master bedroom, or move your laundry around. Those things do all add up into the cost. But again, if there aren't the places for people to step down, that also, but that's a whole other worm if you're looking at, people now moving out of their homes that have been capped under Proposal A, and then they move into a home that now it comes uncapped, and maybe their house has been paid off for 30 years. And so there's a whole other can of worms when you start looking at senior homes and aging in place and where those individuals step down to. And then on the other one, in terms of inclusionary, diverse neighborhoods, I'm actually gonna connect you with Brent Forsberg. He's actually do you know Brent? He's getting his PhD in that, I believe. So he's a great resource to have that conversation with in terms of how zoning in the past has kind of created that divide.
And just to quickly add on that too, like Dawn said, zoning is one of the biggest challenges there, especially, things that are zoned, strictly for single family, larger lot sizes, larger requirement square, every time you require that single family, larger lot size, larger square footage, attached garage, the costs just keep going up and up and up, and then, so that is just one of the largest challenges I think that we have statewide.
I'm going to give my community of Grand Rapids a shout out for one of the things they did this last year, addressing some of this. It's, to his point, zoning reform is probably one of the biggest things, and we could talk about it all day, and I like to talk about it because I think it's a good opportunity and we're building momentum towards it. So how do we get creative and maybe remove some of the fear people get towards that? Because you'll get angry people. You talk about any zoning change, no matter how harmless, people show up, and that's really hard to overcome because it's usually fear-based and they're angry. But there was an effort, and they were successful in looking at some lots in every neighborhood in the city they're kind of wonky. They didn't fit perfect, so they were underutilized, probably vacant, or maybe had like a little piece on it. And so I think it ended up being 400 plus lots when they did this rezoning that are now by right single family, or you could do a duplex. And so that's an opportunity for one or two families to live there on a lot that before was vacant. You're not forcing a huge change in any neighborhood, but every neighborhood now has an opportunity for someone else to live there, someone new to live there, someone that's there maybe to move into another unit and open up something. And you won't see it right away, but over the next decade, that could be 400 homes, not without any issues created, no extra traffic, like none of that fear. And no one's freaked out. It went really smoothly, and there's always a little bit of backlash. But I'm really excited to see the outcomes of that. For like a minor bit of courage and some change in thinking, we've opened the door for something pretty exciting.
Did you have anything else, Vice Chair?
Just how to make housing more affordable in light of new development increasing costs.
I think one of the number one things we need to do is continue to advocate at the federal level. I mean, they have program for very, low income and low to moderate income. And so we need to advocate for that funding so MSHDA can continue to fund those programs and then free up some of our state resources to go towards some of the initiatives we are talking about. Because again, that downward pressure, if we can alleviate some up here, that will open up more housing down at some of the lowest income levels.
And I'll add the tools that we were successful last year in the TIF legislation that will hopefully be coming here after spring break. It is locally driven, so the community, the nonprofit or for-profit developer, if they can reach an agreement on maybe like what a mixed income project looks like, they can cut that deal if it's beneficial for both parties. And so that could be, a mix of incomes. It could be maybe more units at a certain income, but it's a way to get at it in a targeted way that's acceptable to both parties, and it's not forced upon anyone. And we're hoping that over the course of a decade or so, it could lead to a noticeable bump in the supply at that price point.
It's definitely getting those deals to pencil. Right now, they don't pencil even with the layering of incentives. And all of the tools that we worked on that were passed last year and that we're working on now, they don't have floors. They just have ceilings. So they are open to any income level or that area medium income up to 120%.
Okay, we're going to move on to Representative Scott.
My question was already answered, thank you.
And Minority Vice Chair Aragona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Dawn, you started to throw out some numbers at the beginning of your presentation, and they were all based on, I believe, a 7% interest rate. So I kind of wanted to ask you guys, can you speak a little bit to what effect you think that will have? Because clearly, interest rates have gone up. I'm personally, just me as a case study, I don't plan on moving from my house anytime soon. I'm well under 3%. I don't want to pay 7%, even if I were to, as you said, sir, sell my home, make a bunch of money on it. I don't want to do that, right? So my thought is, rates are going up. People aren't going to want to move out of their house. There should be more supply on the market at that point, I would think. And then prices are going to recede a bit. They're going to come back down. So I think the term you guys used was a step-down effect. Wouldn't that lead to the opposite of a step-down effect?
So we had at the Grand Rapids Chamber, we had an economist give an update early this year, and especially for our younger households, there's still a huge interest in for-sale housing, and they're probably going to take on more debt in order to do that, so they're going to pay more for less. This is a question, even just yesterday, we had some of our financial institutions asking, because everyone's trying to predict behavior, and as they try to finance some of the projects, because it's difficult right now. I'm expecting, yes, around the country, people are predicting some things will cool down. I follow some really good experts at the national level. West Michigan market's expected to continue to increase or maybe balance out. Maybe the rest of the state might see a brief dip. One thing I'm really worried about is that we lose the urgency around this issue. And guess what? We're still 190,000 unit shorts right now. Our economy takes off again. And if we add population and all of households continue to grow, we're further behind 5 years from now. And it's like a whiplash. And we're going to see rents and for sale prices skyrocket again. There's still not enough housing, and ultimately our supply-demand issue is going to remain. This does add another layer to it and potentially will help ease pricing a little bit.
At least a tailwind?
Maybe, but it's also if the interest rates remain that high, you still have people that are, especially at the bottom of the income brackets, that are going to be the worst off.
Sure.
Anybody else?
I think
You got one more? Go ahead.
And one more question for you guys. Slide 8. So it looks like 2005, there's 40,000 plus permits that were pulled for single-family homes. Any of us from local government know that there's a few less than that actually built, right? But at that point, we had enough workforce in the state. For instance, we had enough people who knew how to swing a hammer correctly, and we'd pay them to swing that hammer to build 40,000 homes, right? We've gone through over a decade now. Wow, I graduated from high school over a decade ago. That's crazy. So we've gone over a decade now. We've gone over a decade now with substantially less homes being built, anywhere from, I'm seeing a low of around 6,000, or up around 15, 16,000. If tomorrow we were to magically be able to, the market conditions were right, permit conditions were right, zoning conditions were right, and we could build these 40,000 homes again, do we actually have the workforce to do it, and what can we do there?
No, we don't.
Okay.
And that's the problem. I mean, it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? So when you go back and look at these numbers, historically, what we saw was when Katrina hit down south, that was our Katrina in our industry. A lot of our labor force left because there weren't the demands for the homes to be built. And so they all went to Louisiana, the Carolinas, Florida, Texas, and guess what? I found one painter who has come back from that time, when I say and nobody came back. So you saw a max exodus of our workforce leaving. You saw schools, you know, that had construction trades programs, they kind of scaled them back, because why would you have a construction trade program if homes aren't being built? You know, it's not a career path to necessarily go into. Back then, construction was a tough career to go into anyway, or any of the trades, because parents didn't want their child to be a builder. They wanted them to be a doctor or a lawyer. And so as that conversation is changing and shifting to where school counselors are now one of our biggest advocates for, you know, the trades, and they were realizing that college path may not be the right fit for every student. You know, it's still gonna take, we lost a generation of trades in this state. So to your point, yeah, if tomorrow we said, oh, there's 60,000 permits pulled, I mean, to the point, you know, of not being able to have the workforce to even do weatherization programs, you know, we're still gonna have that issue. So as we continue to build that up, you know, you'll see some of that change. But that will also bring down your labor costs a little bit, because right now there's such a labor shortage. You know, laborers are getting paid pretty well in the residential construction industry. So,
Thank you. Representative Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to use sort of where I live in my kind of personal situation there to discuss some of the things that, you know, we're kind of seeing happen in the housing market. I think like one of you said, I bought a house in 2018 for 2,000 square feet, about $160,000. Now, in the intervening years, that house is worth $240,000, $250,000, which I personally probably wouldn't be able to even buy. Just, you know, the way things are, interest rates, et cetera. And even at the time when I was trying to buy the house, going through the financing process, there was constant hurdles of, you know, disqualifying portions of income, whether the house was in the right place to apply for certain, you know, programs. Wasn't. It turns out almost no house ever is. Most of the programs, the way they're designed, basically nothing fits them. And so, you know, I was fairly resourceful. You know, my parents had, you know, means. We had a good realtor. We were able to kind of fit things together and make it work. But that's not the case for most people. I would say the vast majority of people. And how many of them just give up, quit, you know, decide they're not going to buy a house, whatever, you know, because they run into all these hurdles and the programs aren't designed to help them. On top of that, the region I live in, so I live in the city of St. Joe. Census estimates have our population declining pretty steadily over the last decade. I think they're, you know, over the last year, they think we probably lost another 0.5%. But the housing prices keep skyrocketing, largely because of the short-term rental, vacation rental industry, which I'm sure, being from the Northwest, you probably can appreciate that as well. So even as new housing gets built, often it's not permanent residents buying these houses. It's real estate companies, it's investors, sometimes out-of-state second homeowners. But these aren't even being bought by workforce. They're being bought by companies to then rent out across the year. So it's a house that's owned, it's a house that's built, but it's not a house that anybody is living in productively, which creates over time a pretty strong draining effect on our communities, causing less and less people to be able to live there. Spiral, right? And so as you guys are looking through, you know, the problem, that this crisis we have with housing, I'm just encouraging the thought process to kind of extend out to look at, you know, so a lot of the incentive programs that exist don't function in reality. They're incentives on paper, but not incentives in, you know, in the way they play out. And then these other sort of secondary effects that are playing out. And I know my region's not alone that way. You know, the rental industry has gone kind of crazy and rampant across the whole state, lots of parts of the country. And so, you know, looking at these other factors that are contributing to this problem and how we can get this under control, because at this point, if you built a whole new subdivision in my area, 80% of it would get sucked up for commercial rentals. We wouldn't even end up having residents living in those properties because the demand is so high for vacation properties. And then as a sort of contrast point to this, living in St. Joe across the river from me, I've got Benton Harbor. There's actually plenty of housing available in Benton Harbor. No one's buying it. A lot of it needs to be fixed up, sure, but no one's buying it. No one's fixing it. And so it seems to me that we also have to grapple with the fact that communities like Benton Harbor, Detroit, Flint, their populations have declined. There's a lot of available housing stock. What are the factors socially? What are the factors within our incentive structure that's keeping people from wanting to move to these communities where there is housing that could be cheaply bought and repaired? Because that's, I think, to the point that was made earlier, our population decline in Michigan has left housing stock available. Maybe it's not in, exactly the right places, but it's there. If we can only find a way to fix the incentives in a way that encourages people to move to these places and participate in the housing market.
So I will start with that one. I think it's about balance, and a lot of this goes back to very basic planning and zoning, and making sure that municipalities are having updated master plans that include housing, or have a subset plan of housing, so that they are able to accommodate the needs of the people who live and work in their community, and then balance that with a lot of our communities, especially up where Kent works. I mean, they really do, they depend on that tourist economy, but there has to be a balance. And so I can't stress enough, good planning and zoning for that. We are also working very closely with MISTA and the statewide housing plan. And so now having these regional housing partnerships that are going to be able to assist some of those places that have very low capacity. I'm very familiar with, Benton Harbor and St. Joe's situation. Benton Harbor comes down, they have some great opportunities. They are very much lacking capacity right now at the municipal level, to no fault of their own. They just don't have it, or they don't have the resources to bring on additional people. And so working with, those different community groups and economic development groups around there, we are working very closely with the city and MISTA on some of their housing needs. And again, going back to some of these programs at the federal level and at the state level, I think we're seeing a shift at the state level in our Housing Development Authority. There's some new leadership in there from a practitioner who understands how the programs work. So we're seeing some, things that don't work. We're not going to keep doing things the way we've done them just because that's how we've always done them. But at the federal level, we still need to work on some of the requirements there, because even money, CDBG money that comes through MEDC to non-entitlement places, those are federal hoops that it looks like the state's making you jump through, but they're actual federal regulations. So continuing our advocacy at the federal level to remove some of those restraints, as well as the funding around the needs. Let's not just fund the programs we've always funded, but where are the needs, because the needs change.
Okay, thank you. Representative DeBoyer.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the questions that I had going on have been answered. Obviously, great questions. Thank you guys for presenting. So one of the things I did hear you mention the realtors. So I'm guessing there's a discussion going on perhaps about the Land Division Act as well that really hasn't been amended since 1997. Because I think there's provisions in that act that could be looked at that would allow us to create single-family buildable lots in communities that would be much more efficient than going through perhaps the Subdivision Act and the plat and those kinds of things. So my first question to that would be, is that discussion being had, and is that something that you think would be an interesting discussion? Because I think it would be, to help this, because, baseline, if the lot's not available, you can't build it even if you wanted to. Secondarily, one of the things I've encouraged people that I know that are in in the housing market right now, because we do know that the supply is way down right now. I've said to them, right now lumber has come back down to below the long-term average, which is fantastic. Labor is slowly moving down because of the lack of demand that we've seen just literally in the last 3 months because of interest rate ticks. But at 7%, we're still really right at the long-term average on mortgages. And what I've been telling people is the only item you can buy again when you build your home is your mortgage, right? So as these products come down in cost, buy your house and refinance your mortgage later when the rates come down. So I just would like to know, based on the pandemic that we lived through and the impact of all that, how important do you believe the interest rates are in the long-term problem right now and the Land Division Act?
Probably in terms of the interest rates long-term, I think that, we have seen people who have either put a halt on building new because of the interest rates. Probably that's more of a short-term problem than a long-term problem, because eventually they'll right themselves at some point. And so I feel like that's a break right now, but I feel like it will let up at some point, and we'll see hopefully some change go on as inflation, shifts around a little bit. Land Division Act, we're always happy to have that conversation. I don't think any of us up here are opposed to any conversations that might help improve lot availability. I know when I first started at the Home Builders 100 years ago, the way to preserve land was to have large land lot sizes, right? Like, we're gonna make 2-acre minimum lot sizes. Okay, you're not really preserving land, you're just building out further and further. I think that mentality is slowly starting to change in terms of being able to build on smaller lots. But that very much was a problem, 27 years ago. That was the way we preserved land, was we said, we're just gonna set a minimum lot size. We have a developer outside of the Traverse City area, they have 90 acres, and they wanna build workforce housing, tiny homes. It's a 3-acre minimum lot size. You can't make the numbers work if that's your situation. And so a lot of it is, to Josh's point, really trying to change and reframe that conversation, but allowing each community to still have the tools available to keep their community the way they want it to be, look, and feel.
Yeah, I would just say too, Representative, I'm by no means an expert or even close to competent on the inflation discussion, but I have heard other, builders and developers say, those with means, those that have means to build what they want to build, like Dawn said, it's probably just a temporary inconvenience, right? They're still going to get it done if they really want it. The lower you get down that area median income scale, though, the less of an inconvenience and the more of a prohibitor it probably is to build that.
And then my last addition is, when we talk about interest rates, and I'm also more concerned not just about the individuals that are having to take on those mortgages, but how many projects are going to be shelved. And I know quite a few just in West Michigan, even before the interest rate spike, but just because of cost of materials and all that, things just stop penciling out. And so as those projects get shelved, maybe they never come back. Again, we're just adding further to the supply issue.
Right. I do think, to go with your example that you gave, Traverse City, 90 acres, there's actually a reverse that's existing in the more urban areas, which are parcels of land that are, larger than lot size, right? Let's say they're a 9-acre parcel or a 10-acre parcel, that in order to do any kind of division, you have to go to that subdivision act to do it, as opposed to just lot splitting it under maybe the ordinance. And my thought on that is perhaps there needs to be a different attitude about those kinds of pieces as opposed to the 90-acre pieces that are near Traverse City, because those are kind of locked up and there's no profit incentive to be made out of those parcels to go to the subdivision act, because the subdivision act, the process would be so costly because the parcel's not big enough to produce enough lots. So just a thought for you guys, because you guys are the ones digging deep on this. So
We're going to take a look at it. Thank you for that idea.
yeah.
For the sake of time, we're going to wrap up, but I had one issue that I thought maybe we missed, or that I should mention, which is, we didn't touch on affordable housing options for persons with disabilities. So do you think that specifically is a challenge? Is that something that you're hearing about, and do you have any thoughts on that you could share, or anything you think we should work on?
At the risk that my good friend David Bulkowski from Disability Advocates of Kent County is watching, and he will send me an email, I would say yes, we've had some discussion on it. We've been kind of focused, like I said, on the yes, we need housing, and that includes all these subgroups. I do know that whether it's specifically for individuals with disabilities, or also we mentioned senior-oriented housing, not necessarily like senior living, but housing that's just more accessible is an issue. And that's something I think builders and developers and communities are all starting to address in more ways. But we haven't done anything tangible at our discussions at the state level on it yet. But it has been, some of our coalition members are advocates for the disability groups. And so it's something that has come up and will continue to come up.
It's definitely addressed also the need in the statewide housing plan, and we are working on 2.0 of the pattern book right now, and we will have accessible blueprints as well that are free sourced to just that point to help provide some more of those units and get some more of those.
I appreciate that, and I think that's something we need to talk more about, because I want to make sure the disability community is not overlooked as we address these things. And
And
I know you probably are on the same page.
Yeah, well, and while we have a diverse network within our coalition, we're very closely working with some of the other coalitions out there, working on housing supportive services, homelessness, because we know that the housing issue goes across the scale, and so we're all trying to move things forward, not, compete with each other on the initiatives we want. They're all important, they all need to be addressed, and help to be successful. And so we're definitely aware and working with those other folks too, and those other coalitions out there.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank the members for all the great questions today. I think we had some great discussion, and thank you to the panel here for all your thorough answers in your presentation. We look forward to working with you. No absent members and no more business before the committee. The committee will stand adjourned.